Welcome everyone. Today in Rich and Spiritual presents Power Through Constructive Thinking, Volume 2 by Emmett Fox. Chapter 1, Light and Salvation. Psalm 27. 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? 2. When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. 3. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear, though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. 4. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. 5. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, he shall set me up upon a rock. 6. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me, therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy, I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. 7. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy also upon me, and answer me. 8. When thou saidst, Seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, Thy face, Lord, will I seek. 9. Hide not thy face far from me, put not thy servant away in anger, thou hast been my help, leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. 10. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. 11. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path, because of mine enemies. 12. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. 13. I had fainted, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. 14. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. The 27th Psalm is one of the great treatments or meditations in the Bible. Treatment is a convenient technical term we use for scientific prayer, which is directed to the overcoming of a specific difficulty. When trouble of any kind comes into one's life, it is because we have allowed our consciousness to fall to the level where fear and limitation can reach us. A treatment consists in working on one's consciousness to raise it to the spiritual level where the trouble, whatever it is, disappears. Any mental activity which enables us thus to raise the spiritual standard of the soul is a form of prayer, and the Bible abounds in such forms. The history of a problem or a difficulty is often this: the student is worried about something, or they feel ill. As soon as they realize what has happened, they, owing to their knowledge of truth, decline to accept the condition at its face value in the way that most people do, and proceed, in one way or another, perhaps with the help of a prayer such as this, to bring about the necessary raising of their thought. They read the psalm carefully, interpret it spiritually, allow their mind to dwell upon the principles enunciated, appropriate them to themselves, and repudiate the negative suggestion, whatever it was, thus regaining their peace of mind. And when this has been accomplished, the trouble is found to disappear. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? This one verse is a perfect little treatment in itself. Indeed, it is one of the most complete texts in the whole Bible. It is a text that might well be written up over the portals of every church and every school in the land, for within it is contained in embryo the complete Jesus Christ message. Consider what it says. It postulates not merely the existence of God, but the living presence of God in man, for the Lord here means your own indwelling Christ, the I Am. Then it goes on to state that God in you, the inner light, is no mere passive or static presence, but a dynamic power to do everything for you that you can possibly need to have done. Just consider what this one phrase promises: light, salvation, and strength. You will find that these three words cover very completely everything that man needs, for they really mean understanding, power, and demonstration, and what more can you want than that? To begin with light. There is no darkness but ignorance, and in the last analysis all human weaknesses and tribulations are really but a lack of the divine light. Light, more light, said the dying Goethe, and that has been the intuitive cry of humanity through all its history. But God is light, the Bible tells us, and in him is no darkness at all, and Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." If you look back over your own life, you will be certain to find that a great many of your troubles rose through no intentional fault of yours, but through your ignorance or inexperience, or through your want of realizing to the full the implication of some situation which you had to meet. In other words, you suffered through want of light. Well, here the Bible explains that the divine power in you will be your light, and that you can train yourself to utilize it as such at any time that you need it. The Lord is the strength of my life. Having promised us light, the psalm now goes on to promise strength or power. We are to have power to do whatever we need to do, to meet whatever we need to meet, to tackle any problem or difficulty that can present itself in our lives. We are, in fact, to be endued with power from on high, and need no longer trust to our own inadequate efforts. God will show us at any time the meaning of anything that we require to understand, will show us at any juncture what it is we ought to do, and he will furnish us with divine strength to do it. This wonderful verse then sums up its great message in the word, salvation, which, of course, means all-round harmony and demonstration, and with the penetrating psychological skill so characteristic of the Bible when it deals with the soul of man, it obliges us to ask ourselves, point blank, what there is now to be afraid of. And anyone who accepts the premises will hardly have any trouble in reaching the conclusion that there is nothing to be afraid of, because God lives and reigns, and then the back of the trouble is already broken. When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Of course, the wicked and mine enemies, as always in the Bible, stand for our own thoughts, for fears and doubts of every kind, and truly indeed do they sometimes come upon us as though, to eat up our flesh. Most people have at some time or other been only too painfully conscious of the aptness of this telling simile, and here you are promised that they shall stumble and fall. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear, though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. Here the psalmist reiterates his confidence and make us, his readers, reiterate ours. He makes us say that hearts shall not fear, and he makes us believe it too, and can you think of any more beautiful assurance in world than just that one, my heart shall not fear? When you can say quietly and truthfully at any hour of the day or night, my heart shall not fear, the world has no more power over you, you are free. War of various kinds may rise up against you, but you will be confident, and therefore you will be victorious. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, he shall set me up upon a rock. These two verses constitute a remarkable expression of what is often called the second birth. Briefly, this means that a man or woman has taken the most important step that a human being can take, that vital step in comparison with which all other experiences are of relatively minor importance. The new birth or second birth, or what you may be pleased to call it, means that you clearly understand and definitely accept the fact that nothing matters except attunement with God. When you can honestly say, I realize now that nothing in life really matters except that I get my conscious attunement with God, because when I have that, everything else will rightly follow, and until I do get that nothing else can be right, and I am going to make everything else secondary to that, then you have really experienced the new birth, whether the realization itself has yet arrived or not. When you have reached that stage, you do not allow any external happening really to grieve you, or frighten you, or hurt you very deeply, because you know that external things are but passing shadows of no permanent importance. And now, because they cannot bind you, they cannot hurt you, and so you are free. And above all, you do not allow the delaying of the realization itself to fret you or discourage you in the least, because you know the truth, even if you do not feel it. This steadfast determination to dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold His beauty and to learn His secrets, means that you are set upon a rock and that your house of life is secure. See Matthew 7:24-27. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in His tabernacles sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. This verse closes the first section of the treatment with a burst of that praise and thanksgiving that is so powerful for demonstration. Singing in the Bible is always the supreme expression of joy and exaltation, as we know. We note here that to have your head lifted above your enemies is not merely a graphic figure of victory, but is an important metaphysical symbol. The head is the bodily expression for man's power of knowing divine truth, his Christ faculty we call it, and it is, of course, by an increase of understanding that we overcome limitation. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy also upon me, and answer me. When thou saidst, Seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, Thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me, put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help, leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. The psalmist here employs the dramatic form of addressing God. This gives the prayer vividness and intensity, but he is really affirming that God does hear us when we cry with our voice, or speak the word, as we would say. He goes on to claim in different ways that God answers prayer. The actual affirmative form is usually the most effective form for healing a definite condition, but do not hesitate to address God when you feel so inclined. Do not abandon any kind of prayer. In fact, do not give up anything in your religious life that you find to be helpful. This Christ truth comes to us not to destroy but to fulfill, not to rob us of anything good, but to give us more and more of the all good. Seek ye my face. Of course, this does not mean that God has a limited, material face like a man or woman. It is a well-known symbol. It is true that in many of the great classical pictures, God is represented as a man, usually a man round about 60 years of age, and wearing a beard. But this was a well-understood artistic convention. A man at that age was assumed to have attained the maximum degree of wisdom, and so it was really a symbolical way of expressing divine wisdom. The face, in fact, symbolizes the power of recognition. In everyday life it is by the face that we recognize people, not usually by their hands or feet, for example, and to seek the face of God means to seek a recognition of God's presence to the point of realization, so that we know Him by experiencing Him. When we find a difficulty in getting our spiritual contact, it is as though God had hidden His face. Of course, God never does that, but we allow a veil of selfishness, doubt, and fear to come between us and Him. People sometimes speak of the sun having gone in, when they really mean that a cloud has come between the sun and them, but, of course, everyone knows that the sun is shining unchanged on the other side of the cloud. The psalmist now strongly affirms this fact that God cannot and will not hide His face from His children, and he drives his point home by saying that even if his father and mother were to desert him, God would not do so. In the Orient, where the family link is so strong that it overrides all private and personal considerations, this is a very telling statement indeed. In other words, this section of the treatment shows us that doubts and fears may assail the psalmist in the midst of his prayer, as they assail us all at times, but that he meets and vanquishes them in the scientific way. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path, because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. The psalmist now prays for spiritual understanding and for peace of mind. The enemies, as always, are his own fears, and these fears take their rise in the fact that false witnesses rise up and confront him. And no one who has been through this experience will doubt the appropriateness of that telling phrase that our fears are things, such as breathe out cruelty. Verily, doubt and fear are the crudest things that can come into the life of man. I had fainted, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Here, the psalmist, following up the rhythmical play and interplay of thought, characteristic of the Bible, once more makes it clear to his own mind that his reliance is indeed entirely upon the divine power, and not upon his own limited resources, his intellect, or his willpower, for instance. He says that unless he had believed God would perform the necessary miracle, he would not have expected it to happen at all. The closing phrase is a powerful exhortation to be active and steadfast in prayer, that you ought always to pray and not to faint. To wait upon the Lord does not in the least mean neglecting a problem in the hope that God will come along and solve it for you. It means intensifying spiritual activity. Waiting on the Lord means praying constantly and systematically about your problem. The effect of this will be to strengthen your heart, which means that you will receive encouragement and power to continue your prayers, and that your consciousness will be gradually changed until your problem melts away altogether in the realization of restored harmony and peace. Thus does God answer prayer. Chapter 2, The Everlasting Gates. Psalm 24. 1. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. 2. For he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. 3. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? 4. He that hath clean hands, and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. 5. He shall receive the blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. 6. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob. Selah. 7. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. 8. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. 9. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. 10. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. Selah. All through the Bible we are taught that the demonstration of harmony, that is, health, prosperity, and happiness, is God's will for man, because until he has attained all-round harmony, man is not expressing God, and to express God is his destiny. The 24th Psalm is the great summing up of the Bible teaching on this subject. In the unique Bible idiom it explains harmony, which is the true meaning of salvation, and it analyzes in a masterly fashion, as only the Bible can, the causes that produce harmony. In its literary form, the psalm is a magnificent prose poem in 5 stanzas. The first verse constitutes a concise, and, at the same time, exhaustive statement of the great metaphysical law. Let us consider what it really says, or, in other words, let us translate the technical terms employed into the common phraseology of modern life. The opening verse forms one of the best-known phrases in the Scriptures. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. These words are constantly quoted on all sorts of occasions, but the context in which they are used seldom gives evidence of any spiritual understanding of their true import. At worst, I have seen them used as an attempt at consolation in the face of death or of great financial misfortune. The implication seems to be that as everything belongs to God, He is entitled to destroy whatever He pleases without consulting the feelings of mankind. At best, they are taken in the sense of pious, but rather vague, recognition of God as the general source of our supply. Of course, even the vaguest recognition of this primary fact is better than no recognition at all, but unless we get a definite, scientific understanding of the meaning underlying the words, we shall derive no real profit from them. To suppose that God, the great source, substance itself, could cause, or even endorse death or misfortune, is the deadly error that lies at the root of all our troubles, and it is characteristic of the carnal mind thus to pervert a text which, above most others in the Bible, explains the real law of life and prosperity. This carnal mind, as St. Paul calls it, is, of course, nothing but our own restricted and ignorant manner of thinking. To be ignorant of the laws of life, or to misunderstand them, cannot, it is true, change those laws, but it can and does cause us suffering and deprivation of every kind, even to the death belief itself, until such habits of thought are corrected. The key to the true meaning of this first stanza is found in the two pivotal words, Lord, and earth, and here at the very beginning we must pause and ask ourselves what we mean by the Lord. God, of course, we will say, and that is true, but in the Bible the word, Lord, as a rule, means God in the special sense of our own indwelling Christ, our own true identity, the divine spark, the I Am. So this verse states, once and for all, that the earth, which, as we know, is a general term covering all our expression or manifestation, is under the jurisdiction of the I Am. Now all trouble of every kind really arises from the belief that the earth is subject to the dominion of some outer power or law which is able to govern it independently of the I Am, or to destroy it altogether. But the law of being is, that man is the image and likeness of God, and has full dominion over all his conditions, all of them, and our psalm emphasizes this wonderful fact by adding the world and they that dwell therein. Our earth, which is our world, down to every detail of our lives, is really under our own dominion, and is made and unmade by our word. For He hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in His holy place? He that hath clean hands, and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. The hill of the Lord, or His holy place, means the realization of God. It is that vivid, real sense of the presence, that wonderful experience of security and joy that is truly the peace that passeth all understanding. When one attains to this, they know indeed that all is well, and that nothing can by any means hurt them. At such times too they have a marvelous power of helping and healing others. This state of mind is really the one thing that is worth possessing, for having that, one has all, and lacking that, one has nothing. To reach this state is the real object of all our prayers and treatments. It is nothing less than the dominion that we are promised in Genesis, and here the Bible impresses this truth upon us, and also instructs us how we are to get it. It is indeed a holy place because nothing defiled in any way can reach us there. Sickness, poverty, and sin cannot enter, that is to say, we cannot feel that such things are real while we are in this state of mind, and, as soon as we feel that they are not real, they disappear into nothingness. The inspired writer then goes on to tell us how we are to raise ourselves into this wonderful consciousness, and it is splendid to note that he makes a point of affirming that it is founded upon the seas, and established upon the floods. This means that people like ourselves with all sort of limitations and difficulties are the very people of whom the promise is intended, and that in spite of all our shortcomings we may reach it too, for it is founded upon the waters, and water is always the human soul as we know it, subject, as we are only too sadly aware, to storms, floods, and sometimes even typhoons. So we see that there is not the slightest reason to be discouraged, merely because one's present demonstration seems to be very poor and spiritual power seems entirely lacking. It does not matter, because the high consciousness is built upon just such stormy seas as this. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. Having thus indicated, as the Bible does on almost every page, that God's salvation is for anybody and everybody, the wayfaring man though a fool shall not err therein, it goes on in its usual practical way to explain exactly how the thing is to be done. It says that for the great task we require clean hands and a pure heart, and that we must not lift up our souls to vanity, nor swear deceitfully. These instructions are certainly definite, and it will pay us to study them in some detail. First in logical order comes the need for a pure heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I suppose it is only lifelong familiarity with this statement that blinds us to its staggering importance. Just try to realize for a moment the thing that is said here, they shall see God. Think what that must mean, and think whether any price could be too much to pay for that experience to see God. Well, the Bible promises that on certain terms the wayfaring man, you and I, may see God. Of course, you will understand that there is no question of seeing God with the physical eyes as one sees a man or a house. With the physical eyes one can see only physical things, and God is spirit, and spiritual things have to be spiritually discerned. Also, spiritual perception is not a matter of apprehending outlines and surfaces as physical sight is. Spiritual perception is direct spiritual experience in which the subject and the percipient become one. Therefore, to see God means, as far as our restricted and crippled human speech can express the thing at all, a realization of perfect essential unity with divine goodness itself. But who are the pure in heart? In the Bible use of the term, the words pure and purity are not confined to physical purity, absolutely essential as that is. They are expanded to include freedom from every kind of error and limitation. Now all error arises from a belief in the possibility of a cause other than God, and so, fundamentally, purity means complete loyalty to the belief in one single, all-embracing, omnipotent cause, which is utterly good God, our Father which art in heaven. To believe in God as the only cause, and absolutely to reject any claim for a lesser cause of any kind, to refuse to concede the power of causation to such things as climate, germs, man-made medical laws, or laws of poverty or decay, to refuse to concede reality to the race limitations of time and space, and, in the face of appearances, to judge righteous judgment, and hold unswervingly to the one cause. This is purity. In the Bible, the heart usually stands for what we call the subconscious mind, and it is our subconscious mentality that we have to redeem and purify. To keep one's mentality consciously loyal to the one power is only half the battle, though it is the first and therefore the more important half. The other half is to purify and re-educate the subconscious from the errors which have accumulated there in the course of time. If we do this work faithfully, we shall sooner or later arrive at the point where we really have a pure heart in the full Bible sense, and then we shall see God. Jesus had reached this stage when he said, "The prince of this world cometh and findeth nothing in me," meaning that his subconsciousness was so purified that no limitation thoughts could have any effect upon him, although at one time he was, in all points tempted like as we are. This purifying of the soul, not merely from the grosser sins which everybody recognizes, but from the 1001 concessions to limitation belief that fill the everyday life of humanity, is the one and only pathway to freedom. It is a wonderful beginning when we accept the spiritual basis of the allness of God, but it is only when we have begun to apply this truth in every practical detail of our lives, day after day, when we are not in the humor to do so as well as when we are, that we really begin to get results. This is to have clean hands. The hand is always the power of manifestation or expression, and unless our expression, our all-day thinking is clean, that is to say, spiritual and true, we have not clean hands, and we cannot expect to ascend that wondrous hill of the Lord. This wonderful lesson receives its emphasis by repetition in a slightly different form, as in the Hebrew literary tradition. So we are told that the redeemed, or saved, is he who does not give his soul unto vanity, another way of saying one who does not look for his happiness to manifestation instead of to cause, or believe in more causes than the one. To swear deceitfully is to pin your faith to error, to have a real conviction, as so many people have, that evil is true. He shall receive the blessing from the Lord, send righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob. Selah. To many it may seem that the purification of the heart, or the redemption of the subconscious, will be a long and wearisome task, but we have to remember that when we pray it is God who works and not we, and that tasks difficult or impossible to us present no difficulty to him. If you will use the power of the word to declare that God is purifying you, that God is setting you free, that God is inspiring and enlightening you, you will be amazed how seemingly impossible difficulties will be overcome, how old habits of thinking will fall away and new ones come in, and this is because you will receive your righteousness, or right thinking, from God. You have sought his face, and, under the great law, you must begin to express something of his nature, for we always grow like unto that which we contemplate. Here the expression, O Jacob, means, O God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. Selah. This, the third stanza of the poem, is a glorious statement of the power of prayer. It is not exaggerating to say that it is probably the most glorious tribute to the power of prayer ever written. Gates and doors always symbolize understanding. A little thought will show the good logic of this. The gate or door is the place where we pass in or out of a city, in or out of a house, or a field, from one room to another, and so forth. In other words, it marks a change of consciousness. The place that you are in at any moment is really the state of consciousness which you have at the moment, and what we know as movement through space from one place to another, from Europe to America, or from the dining room into the drawing room, is really a partial change of consciousness. Of course, the only change of this kind which has any true value is the absolute change brought about by an increase in the understanding of truth, and every time that we do gain such an increase we enter a fresh stage upon the path. Lift up your heads, O ye gates is a dramatic way of telling us that it is only by the attainment of a higher degree of understanding that the King of glory, the vivid realization of God which we are seeking, can come to our souls. The gates and doors are told to lift up their heads, that is to say, to become loftier. In order that there may be no possible room for any misunderstanding of the mighty import of the message, we are then told to ask ourselves who the King of Glory is, and for what he stands, and it is impressed upon us that he is nothing less than the Lord, and that he is strong and mighty in battle. Not just a figurehead potentate, but a man of war, and the battle he fights, of course, is our battle for the overcoming of sin, sickness, and death. The poet concludes with the reaffirmation that the power we contact in prayer is the Lord of hosts, which is the Bible term for the aspect of God as power. These Bible treatments are not mere literary exercises, they are definite methods for bringing about a change in consciousness. That means that it is of very little use merely to read one of them through hurriedly and then put it aside. A treatment such as this psalm should be read over slowly many times. As you read, you should pause frequently to become receptive for a moment in order to give a chance for inspiration to come through. Do not make these pauses too long. Pause for an instant, long or short, according to whether you are a slow or a quick thinker, and then, if nothing comes, continue reading. Always, when reading the Bible, put in between the lines, so to speak, the thought that God is inspiring you. This is the way to get direct illumination on the Bible teaching, at first hand. Remember that other people's interpretations of the Bible, however helpful and stimulating they may be, can never be as valuable as those that you get for yourself. The Bible will give you new and wonderful knowledge having a direct bearing upon your own personal and private problems and difficulties, if only you will make that possible by adopting the right attitude of mind. When your usual methods of treating a problem do not seem to be bringing results, it is a good plan to discontinue them altogether for a time, and to work exclusively for inspiration instead. This can be done by opening the Bible at random and reading whatever texts your eye falls upon. If the first page opened does not interest you, try elsewhere, and continue to do so until you do find something that gives you a new light. Note carefully, however, that it is a change in consciousness that you are now seeking, a change that will enable you to pray more freshly and effectively, and to be more sensitively receptive. You are not now seeking precise practical instructions. Do not take the wording of any text literally as a direction for conduct, as such a practice easily ends in superstition. It is the letter of the Bible that killeth, the spirit that giveth light. Chapter 3, Daniel in the Lion's Den. Daniel 6. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is one of the half-dozen best-known stories in the Bible. I imagine there are very few people who have not heard it. It is a particular favorite with the children, and children are great judges of literary and dramatic power, as everyone knows who has ever tried to entertain one of them with a story. Now we learn from the Jesus Christ teaching that there is no such thing as chance. Everything happens in accordance with the law of cause and effect, and, therefore, when a story or a legend is found to have a worldwide circulation, and when that circulation continues generation after generation, we know that it must contain something of great importance to humanity. So it is with the story of Daniel's great demonstration. It contains within it a wonderful lesson in the truth of being, and for all these centuries it has helped and comforted millions of people, even though they did not have the scientific key to its meaning. Let us now consider in a little detail some of the principal points of the story as it is given in the 6th chapter of Daniel. We are told that Daniel was made what would be called nowadays Chancellor, or Chief Secretary of State, under Darius. This was a position of great honor and responsibility, but also one involving great personal danger to the holder. One could not occupy such an office without making many powerful enemies, and in that ancient Oriental world they were apt to make short work of inconvenient officials in high places, more particularly when the incumbent was a foreigner. The sword or dagger, poison administered in food, and even through wearing apparel such as gloves or boots, were freely employed in such cases, and, above all, political intrigue was used to bring the obnoxious official to his end. In the case of Daniel, we are told that a carefully engineered plot was carried through, which placed his patron, Darius, in the position of being absolutely helpless to save Daniel. Such plotters would take the character of the monarch into account when laying their plans. A small-minded, jealous man would be handled in one way, a religious fanatic in another. Darius, who was neither of these things, but an intellectual formalist of a rigid type, was trapped in his own weakness. Daniel was arrested, taken down to a pit of lions, and thrown in. Such a pit of wild animals was sure to be found near most eastern palaces of those days, the animals being required partly for display, and partly, as in the present instance, to furnish terrifying examples of political punishment. Daniel, however, instead of being promptly torn to pieces, remained untouched, and in due course was liberated from the lion's den without so much as a scratch. Spiritually understood, this is one of the greatest lessons in the Bible. Daniel is every man. The story of his great tribulation is the story of any difficulty that can come into your life, or into mine. Incidentally, it is the story of the whole of your human experience in general, but it applies also to each individual difficulty that you have to overcome. Remember that every individual problem that you have to face is but a tiny model, as it were, of the great problem of overcoming our human belief in limitation, sickness, sin, and death, that is called in theology the fall of man. When some great problem or trouble comes into your life, you are, figuratively speaking, thrown into a pit of lions, and many fearful hearts have felt that this is indeed a very graphic description of the state of mind they have experienced. Now let us look for the key to the story, and we shall find it here in verse 10. Daniel had acquired the habit of prayer. Daniel was a man who practiced the presence of God, not now and again, but constantly and regularly. This verse is very illuminating. We are told that Daniel knew that the warrant for his arrest was signed. When you are working and praying regularly, along the right lines, you will always get to know anything which it is necessary that you should know. You will not be taken by surprise. Daniel knew that trouble was pending, and immediately he started praying, or treating, about it. He did not pronounce an affirmation once or twice and expect it to work, like an incantation. He prayed, clearing up his consciousness, 3 times a day. His windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. Of course, the chamber is the secret place of Jesus, or one's consciousness. Jerusalem is always the highest part of man's nature or personality, short of the actual realization of God, and so Daniel, 3 times a day, turned in thought to God and raised his thought as high as he possibly could. No one can do more than this. It is a mistake to think that you must get a wonderfully vivid realization of spirit in order to overcome any difficulty. Prayer will get you out of your difficulty whether you get any realization or not. You can always open your window toward Jerusalem. Whether you ascend Mount Zion, which is the realization of God Himself, does not lie in your hands, the turning toward Jerusalem does. In the same verse it says, as he did aforetime. This tells us that Daniel was in the habit of thus praying scientifically. Some people pray only when they are in trouble, and then, naturally, they do not find it easy to get any sort of contact. One would not expect to practice on the piano only occasionally, and yet play well on any desired occasion. Daniel made a regular practice of prayer and meditation 3 times a day, and when the dark hour came, this practice stood by him. He knew beforehand that trouble was coming. He probably knew almost exactly what it would be. And he met it by working steadily on his own consciousness in order to get rid of fear. He probably succeeded in doing this even before his arrest, and was able to rejoice in victory well before the victory itself made its appearance. Of course, the real causes of all our troubles lie within ourselves. The only enemies we have to overcome in the long run are our own fears, doubts, selfishness, and so forth. These are typified by King Darius and the plotters. All your enemies are within yourself. A man's enemies shall be those of his own household. Darius represents, in particular, our belief in the power of the external world to limit or injure us. He represents none of the things that are usually called evil, but rather our limiting belief in the fixed and unchangeable character of outer things that are in themselves good. The truth is that no outer conditions have any power in themselves, no outer laws need bind us, when we appeal to the supreme Christ law of divine freedom and harmony, but we do not know, or we forget this great truth, and so we go on believing in and submitting to all kinds of supposed laws of limitation. We believe that we are too old to do something that we could very well do. We believe that a certain climate can adversely affect our bodies, when in truth it has no such power. I knew a man in London who was working for the municipal government, a service which is swathed in red tape and vexatious restrictions of every kind. Feeling this fact acutely, he remained in a subordinate position for 3 years through being under the impression that his qualifications did not admit him to a certain higher grade, the work of which he knew he could do very well. After these 3 years he learned accidentally that there was in fact no regulation such as he had supposed to prevent his holding such a position, and he promptly applied for it, and was appointed, with a considerable increase in salary. This is an example of a belief in an outer limitation which in reality could have been overcome at any moment. It is a good example of Darius. The supposed rule concerning qualifications was not, even supposedly, an evil thing like dishonesty, deceit, or murder, but a rule, good in intention to ensure the appointment of suitable people. The plotters represent essentially evil things, such as the above-mentioned sins, and of course every man has to reckon with these too. The law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not, is a splendid expression of our usual notion of these outer limitations as being impossible to overcome, of there being things and conditions that we just have to put up with. There is a well-known picture of Daniel in the lion's den, which was certainly painted by an inspired artist. Most of my readers will know it, and I always keep a copy of it in my room. Daniel is shown not looking at the lions, but turning his back on them. What a lesson in scientific prayer or treatment, what I have elsewhere called the golden key. The more we think over any difficulty, the more we amplify it, and staring at our lions causes them to grow and grow until they are as big as elephants. Daniel is shown looking upward toward the light, a graphic representation of the practice of the presence, and the lions, instead of looking ferocious or angry, seem good-humored enough as they stroll about or stand watching him curiously. Those who have had much to do with wild animals in their native jungle always insist that no wild animal will attack a man who is not afraid of it. In India many stories are told of true yogis, that is those who follow the Raja or royal yoga, which is the search for reunion with God, and not just the acquiring of the power to play tricks on the etheric plane, living among tigers and other beasts of prey in perfect safety. And the Bible itself tells us that a time will come when the lion shall lie down with the lamb, because man has gotten fear, and hatred, and jealousy, and condemnation out of his own heart, and has thereby changed the whole moral and spiritual climate of this planet. When you are in trouble, you are Daniel in the lion's den. The lions will seem terribly ferocious, but pray until fear has begun to go. Keep knowing the truth, in the face of all appearances, and you will come out of the lion's den safe and sound, without a single scratch, as Daniel did. Nay, more, you will come out stronger and better for the ordeal, because no problem that we meet in the light of truth ever leaves us where it found us. Every problem thus overcome is a definite step upward in the growth of the soul. It is significant, is it not, that being unable to accuse Daniel of any of the ordinary transgressions, his enemies proved beyond a shadow of doubt that Daniel was a man who declined to worship, to believe in or trust any power but God. In the sight of the world this was an indictable offense, but in the light of truth it was shown to be Daniel's salvation. The longer one continues in the truth teaching, the more convinced one becomes of the fact that this is a mental world, and that man's dominion lies within his own mentality. When once we have grasped this fact clearly and have determined to put it into operation in our lives, it seems as though our difficulties were over, and theoretically this could be the case. Practically, however, it calls for the most rigid and persistent watchfulness on our part, if we are not to be constantly straying from the true path of correct thought. "Watch and pray," said Jesus, knowing how subtle are the temptations to step aside into old errors. "The price of liberty is eternal vigilance," said an ancient sage, and never was this truer than in the life of the soul. If you really want to demonstrate health, happiness, and true prosperity, and every student of truth knows that it is their duty to demonstrate these things as soon as they possibly can, you must set aside a definite time every day for prayer and meditation, and for checking up upon your own daily conduct and demonstration, or want of demonstration. You must conduct the affairs of your soul in a businesslike way. Too many religious people fail to realize that the business of spiritual growth calls for order, method, and intelligent organization, just as much as does any commercial business or engineering enterprise, or any other important activity, if it is to be a success. So great is the power of prayer that not only will it get you out of any difficulty, but the things in yourself which produced that difficulty will be utterly destroyed forever, with all their associated thoughts and fears, and all consequences or collateral effects that might arise from the problem itself will be taken care of too, and break all their bones in pieces or ever they came at the bottom of the den. There is no end to a prayer. It echoes on forever in your soul. Long after the visible demonstration has been made and forgotten, the prayer that produced it continues to work for your spiritual advancement, for the creative power of a God thought is unlimited and eternal. Chapter 4, The Garden of Allah. Isaiah 35. There is no God but God. Quran. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Bible. Even those who love the Bible most are apt to make the mistake of looking upon it as merely a book, the greatest book ever written, no doubt, but still a book, whereas the truth about the Bible is that it is really a spiritual vortex, in which spiritual power pours from the absolute or divine plane into the physical plane or plane of manifestation. But the Bible is not only the great source of spiritual truth, it is also the greatest collection of literary masterpieces that we possess. Almost every literary form is represented in the Bible, both in prose and poetry. History, biography, philosophy, the short story in its perfection reread some of the parables, for example the epic, and even that supposedly modern form, the novel, are all found there. The Book of Job is really a play, and Revelation is a drama in form so strange and unprecedented that it remains in its entirety almost incomprehensible to most people, however much they may appreciate its separate details. Above all, the Bible abounds in beautiful and powerful prayers or treatments, and this alone makes it for us the most important book in the world. This is because prayer is really the only thing that matters. The only way in which man can improve himself or his conditions, get a better knowledge of God, save his soul, in short, is by prayer. Prayer indeed is the only real action there is, that is to say, It is the only action that makes things different. Whenever you pray, you change your soul for the better. If the prayer is very short or the degree of realization very poor, the change it brings about may be small, but it occurs. It could not by any chance happen under any circumstances that any man or woman could pray for a single moment without some result for good following. Whenever you pray, your whole subsequent life is, as a consequence, somewhat different from what it would have been had you not prayed. Now prayer is the only thing that does change the quality of the soul. Any other activity may make a quantitative change in the soul by adding experience, or by extending one's fund of knowledge, but it does not change the quality. Only prayer does that, and it is the quality of one's soul that determines one's destiny. As long as there is no qualitative change in your soul, you will, under any given circumstances, say or do the thing that such a person as you are would say or do in such a case, because we never really act out of character. We are never other than ourselves. When we try to be other than ourselves by an effort of human will, we are just being ourselves all the more on that account. When you pray, however, you by that act become at least a slightly different man or woman and, therefore, all your subsequent activities are different too. So prayer is the only thing that matters. The word, treatment, is a technical term that many of us use for prayer that is directed to the overcoming of a specific, practical difficulty, and the Bible is full of prayers and treatments of every kind. When you find yourself in any kind of trouble, no matter what it may be, whether you think it is caused by somebody else's conduct, or whether you feel that it is your own fault, or whether it seems to be no one's fault, in any case the only possible thing to do is to treat yourself about it. If you give yourself an efficient treatment, or it may be that several treatments will be necessary, then the difficulty, whatever it is, will presently disappear and you will find yourself out of your trouble. In other words, your prayer will be answered, or, as we often say, you will make your demonstration. But what is a treatment? Well, briefly, a treatment means that you recollect and realize the truth about God until you have brought about a change in your own consciousness, whereupon, as a result of this change in yourself, the outer things completely change too. Note particularly that this does not mean merely that you gain courage or fortitude to meet your difficulties in a new spirit. That would be better than nothing, but not much better. The tremendous fact is that prayer does change things. As a consequence of the change in your mentality that results from your treatment, outer conditions change completely. Other people change their conduct and their attitude toward you. Unpleasant things that would otherwise have happened do not happen, and good things that would not have happened had you not prayed, do happen, brought about by prayer alone. Prayer does change things. Now how is the necessary change in consciousness to be brought about? Or, in other words, how is a treatment made? Well, the first thing to realize is that merely repeating a form of words is seldom any use at all. That is better than nothing if you should be so frightened or worried that you cannot do anything more. In fact, to cling to a single phrase may be the only thing that can save you in a great emergency, but fortunately such an extreme condition is very exceptional. It is the change in feeling and conviction that matters. Any means that brings this about, and whatever means does it most quickly, is the best treatment. Whatever will raise your consciousness from the lower level of trouble to the higher level of freedom is a treatment. In many cases the quiet, thoughtful repetition of certain affirmations of truth is sufficient, such as, "I am surrounded by the love and peace of God," or "Divine intelligence opens my way." Sometimes, and especially if you are faithful in daily prayer and meditation, the mere momentary feeling out for God will clear the most formidable difficulty with lightning-like rapidity, feeling out in thought, that is to say, without formulating any words at all. The reading of a page of any spiritual book that appeals to you or, above all, a few verses or a chapter from the Bible often constitutes a most powerful treatment. It is for this reason that the Bible has so many prayers and treatments included in its pages. The literary arrangement in which we have received our Bible is very misleading in many instances. The divisions into chapters and verses was made comparatively recently. The original writers had nothing whatever to do with it, and it was done in an arbitrary fashion that paid very little attention to the subject matter concerned. So it happens that with a writer, such as Isaiah, for instance, his works have been run together with little or no regard to sequence of subject or chronological order, and then, so to speak, chopped up into approximately equal lengths which are called chapters. In addition to this, a great deal of material, splendid in itself but not belonging to the prophet called Isaiah, has been included. Of course, this makes no practical difference at all, as long as we know about it. The actual writer of anything in the Bible does not matter in the least, because the true author of it all is the Holy Spirit. One of the greatest prayers or treatments ever written is included among the writings of Isaiah, and is known to us as chapter 35. This chapter number, as we have seen, is purely an arbitrary designation. The chapter itself has nothing in particular to do with either chapter 34 or chapter 36. That number has no more intrinsic significance than the number a book may bear on the shelf of a library. As this chapter constitutes a particularly beautiful and effective treatment for any purpose, we shall now consider it at some length. The first thing we notice is that in its literary form it is a glorious poetic rhapsody. The writer, in contemplating the wonder and the love of God, rises to a white heat of spiritual exaltation. The leaden shoes of fear and doubt that glue man to the earth in his everyday life are cast aside, and he rises on the pinions of divine inspiration into the region where all his petty limitations and handicaps vanish in the splendor of the divine presence. For the time being he leaves behind him every small and mean thing that keeps a man from God, from joy and freedom. And as he has succeeded in enshrining this transcendent experience in words that still live and glow today with much of his own original divine ecstasy, it becomes possible for us in using this prayer with spiritual understanding, to kindle our own torch from the same fire, and, if we can tune ourselves in with his note, to transcend also any particular difficulty or group of difficulties that may be oppressing us. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice, and blossom as the rose. The first thing that strikes us here is that the writer is, of course, as all Bible writers are, an Oriental, and therefore he will give his message in the language and idiom of the Orient. This is so obvious that it would be unnecessary to mention it did we not know how many European and American people down to the last generation were in the habit of taking every Oriental simile and flourish at its face value, and often trying to apply it with the utmost literalness to some condition of life in London, or Manchester, or Chicago. He begins his prayer in the best possible way that a prayer can begin, by a splendid act of faith in God. Always begin your prayers with an act of faith. Remember that Jesus tells us that faith in the love of God will literally move mountains. And so our Oriental prophet starts with what is doubtless the greatest affirmation of faith in God of which an Oriental is capable. He looks to God and cries, "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad. And the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." Think of it, the Oriental desert to become a garden, to blossom as a rose, to be a center of prosperity and riches. Nothing in our human experience can seem on the face of it less probable than this. No human trouble could be more difficult than this problem of turning the desert into a smiling garden. But with God all things are possible, absolutely all things, anything, and so to him the redemption of a desert wilderness is just as easy as anything else. The Bible is predominantly the book of a desert people. Always as the great drama of the Bible story moves across the stage of time, we are conscious of the desert as the background against which it moves. Palestine, a narrow strip of land not much bigger than Wales, was hemmed in by a desert on 3 sides, and by the unfamiliar and to them unattractive sea on the 4th. Almost everything that came into Palestine came across a desert. Goods and merchandise made their slow way in the leisurely desert caravans. All visitors who came to that country came through the desert and arrived wearied and parched with its sand and dust, and any new ideas that might filter into the world of Palestine had to filter through the desert too, and would inevitably arrive, like the travelers themselves, bearing about them something of the same desert atmosphere. For, just as to people living in the British Isles the sea is always the background, it is the sea that has molded their history, and conditions their everyday lives, even though they may live so far from the ocean that they have never seen it. So the people of Palestine, though they might never venture into the wilderness itself, were shaped and governed from first to last by the eternal, unchanging desert, and the conditions of life that spring from a desert home. Always the desert haunted them. There is not a page in the Bible in which we do not vaguely sense the eternal sands, and hear the distant tinkle of the camel bells. And so for us of the West it calls for a distinct effort of the imagination truly to appreciate this splendid declaration with which the poet opens his prayer. He takes the one condition above all others with which man had been totally unable to deal, much less to conquer, the desert, the one condition perhaps which would seem to him as an Oriental to be eternal and unchangeable, the one condition, we may say, that it would be utterly hopeless to think of changing. And he declares that the goodness and love of God shall completely conquer this. How complete and thorough that conquest is to be is signified by piling up, in the Eastern way, symbol upon symbol. It shall rejoice and blossom as the rose, one of the richest and most splendid of God's creations, calling for a special quality of soil and particular care in its culture. It shall blossom abundantly, and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, and the excellency of our God. On and on he goes in pursuit of his great theme. The glory of the desert redeemed is to be in proportion to its former barrenness. It shall rejoice with joy and singing. Glory of every kind shall be heaped upon it, the especial glory that the poet knew in his time as only to be found among the cedars of Lebanon, the austere grandeur that he felt only in Carmel, and the sweet, fragrant peace that he had known among the beautifully kept gardens of Sharon. He closes this first stanza, his opening declaration of faith, by reaffirming they shall see the glory of the Lord, and the excellency of our God. In reading this carefully we begin to catch something of the prophet's own divine faith in the goodness of God, and as faith is infectious, we find the power of his understanding gradually fanning our tiny spark of it into a flame. Below each level of thought in the Bible there always lies yet a deeper level for those who can find it, and so it is here. Lebanon, Carmel, and Sharon in detail stand for certain spiritual faculties in the soul of man that gradually develop as he persists along the pathway of spiritual awakening, and the prophet here implies, for those who can understand, that these definite spiritual gifts are the outcome of such prayers as this. Of course, the desert or wilderness is a general term for any kind of trouble or difficulty. It may be a specific problem that you have to overcome, or, in the wider sense, the general state of feeling cut off from God, of which we are all so conscious to our sorrow. It is interesting to note that, in a very wonderful and different sense, the desert may be taken to symbolize that state of mind in which man has attained to a high degree of concentration upon God. Sooner or later you will have to put God first in your life. That is to say, your own true spiritual development must become the only thing that really matters. It need not, perhaps had better not, be the only thing in your life, but it must be the first thing. When this happens, you will find that you have got rid of a great deal of the unnecessary junk that most people carry about, mental junk, of course, although physical junk is very apt to follow upon this. You will find that you will do a great deal less running about after things that do not matter and only waste your time and energy, when once you have put God first. Your life will become simpler and quieter, but in the true sense, richer and infinitely more worthwhile. This has usually happened in the desert. The true desert wanderer has few physical possessions, none of our artificial needs, and few of our so-called comforts, yet he is among the happiest of the human race. Commonly he fears nothing in life or in death. It was an Arab sitting at the door of his tent at night, free from the burden of useless possessions, his mind and heart clarified by simple living, who gazed up at the myriad golden stars so bright in the eastern sky, looked about him with uninterrupted gaze to the distant dusky horizon, and said, "The desert is the garden of Allah. Strengthen ye the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not, behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense, he will come and save you." The first stanza of this wonderful poem prayer having led the reader to make a splendid declaration of faith, the second stanza, takes up definitely the task of working upon his consciousness direct. It says, "Strengthen ye the weak hands." Here we meet one of the most important symbols to be found in the Bible, the hand. The hand, briefly, stands for the power of manifestation, or the capacity to express God's ideas on the physical plane. It is the power of getting things done. It is the power of making demonstrations, as we say, or of getting answers to prayer, and so the expression, "Strengthen ye the weak hands," is a command that we are to rise up out of limitation, refuse to put up with it, and insist upon harmony and freedom, that, in fact, we ought always to pray and not to faint. Jesus has told us by means of two separate parables that we are not to accept less than harmony, that we are to go on praying until we make our demonstration, that we are not to take no for an answer. And here the inspired writer teaches the same lesson. You should never put up with anything. You should never be content to accept less than harmony, peace, and freedom. Until you get these things, you must be insistent in prayer. This particular symbol is a very interesting one. Man is, in his true nature, a spiritual being, a spark from the divine fire, but this divine spark, the I Am, has to be embodied, and the human body with which we are familiar, which we all carry about with us, is really but an embodiment of the various faculties and capacities of the divine I Am. Actually, we are at present seeing this embodiment in a very, very limited way, even in the case of the most healthy and beautiful bodies. Nevertheless, that is what it is. The real self, or I Am, has the power of manifesting absolutely any idea or set of ideas which it can understand, even to some extent, and this power we see embodied as the hand. In all ages the hand has been understood symbolically in this way. We speak of a thing being handy. A person who performs all sorts of essential business for another is often spoken of as his right hand. At banquets the guest of honor is placed at the right hand of the host. The Christ truth sitteth at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty. It is the Christ nature that manifests God through man. The word for hand, in Latin, is manus, and this is derived originally from a Sanskrit word meaning the thinker. Our English word, man, ultimately derives from the same root and carries the same implicit meaning. And we know that it is man's raison d'etre to manifest God. Man the manifester is or should be the hand of God through which God works, and this he is through his power of thought, because he is essentially a thinker. When we wish to paralyze a man's activities, we handcuff him, thereby putting his hands out of action, and to have both hands amputated is reckoned as almost complete disablement. Confirm the feeble knees. This is a very obvious figure for getting rid of fear. There are not many of the sons of men who have not at some time or other known what it was to feel their knees almost literally going from under them through nervousness or fear. Such a condition, unless overcome, is the prelude to the total collapse of the body in what we call a faint. Now when people are in grave difficulties and are beginning to lose their courage, and to lose courage is to lose all, the soul may very aptly be described as being in this condition. The prophet therefore strikes boldly at our weak hands and feeble knees and proceeds to confirm them, or make them firm, by bringing to mind the truth about God. One might well say indeed that essentially scientific prayer or treatment is just this thing of pausing to recollect the truth about God. We do not try to do something with our prayers in the sense of seeking to manipulate things to our liking. Such a proceeding would be willpower and not prayer, but we pause in the current of material things, and recollect what we know to be the truth about God. This acceptation and reaffirmation of the truth is what brings a spiritual demonstration. The prophet says with unanswerable simplicity, "Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense, he will come and save you." And why? Because you are saying your prayers. Because, instead of being carried away in the tide of difficulty as the heathen or non-prayer is, you have paused to recollect the truth about God. You have made the magnificent declaration of faith in the first stanza, and so the action of God will now come into your life with vengeance or vindication. People sometimes wonder why a loving God should allow them to get into trouble at all in the first place, or why he does not help them without waiting for their prayers. The answer is that we have free will. This is the most precious of all things for us because it is our identity in God as the I Am. If God were to interfere in our lives without our having called upon him through prayer, our free will would be abrogated, and we should lose our identity. Actually, this could not happen, because it would be against the law of being. We have to know here that this word, vengeance, in the Bible is a technical term meaning vindication. Needless to say, God, infinite mind, is not capable of approaching anything like what is known among men as revenge. What happens is that the action of God following upon your prayer vindicates the law of being, and as this law is the law of perfect good, you are saved. The demonstration may figuratively be described as the recompense for your treatment. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing, for in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. These two phrases constitute one of the most wonderful passages in the whole Bible. There is no other that can quite be put beside it. It is a song of triumph, and joy, and liberation, probably the most glorious celebration of the power of God in prayer that ever was written. Think what it promises, what it announces to be the natural result of spiritual prayer. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped, the lame man shall leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. Is this a sufficient manifesto of spiritual healing? Is anything of importance left out? Can we, in the face of this, declare that any physical condition is beyond the reach of prayer? Can we dare say or think any more that with God some things are possible, and some things are not? The blind, the deaf, the dumb, and the crippled are to be set free and restored to health by the power of God. Physical healing is one of the most glorious manifestations of the universal Christ. It is the beautiful gate of the temple, but it is not everything. It is the spiritual gift that has been most emphasized in the metaphysical movement for 2 or 3 generations, but as St. Paul was careful to imply in his enumeration, it is only one gift. The healing of the body is essential, but the thing that really matters, of course, is the spiritual development of the soul. What is a physical healing but the outer evidence that a step in spiritual development has been taken, and the physical healings enumerated here fully and beautifully as they apply to the physical body, are still more important when raised to a higher level. It is glorious that the physical eyes of the physically blind should be opened, but the physical eyes also symbolize man's power of spiritual perception, and the magnificent promise of these 2 verses particularly implies that the gift of spiritual perception is to be acquired by prayer, and that when we earnestly pray for it, nothing can prevent our getting it. It is glorious that the ears of the physically deaf should be unstopped, but hearing, on the higher level, stands for spiritual understanding, and it is 10 times more important that spiritually obtuse people should obtain an understanding of the truth about God and about life. It is glorious that the physically crippled should regain his strength so that, throwing away his crutches and straightening his back, he shall assume the birthright of healthy manhood and run and leap like a deer. But it is 10 times more important that moral and spiritual cripples should succeed in surmounting their infirmities and rise up in the free exercise of spiritual faculty and prayer. It is glorious that the physically dumb should acquire the power of the physical word to speak and sing, but the tongue stands also for man's spiritual dominion or power, and it is 1,000 times more important for the spiritually dumb, those men and women who have no power of spiritual demonstration, to acquire the power of the logos or creative word, which is their divine inheritance, and learn to use it with telling effect for themselves and others. Never before or since has the importance of these things, both physical and spiritual, been brought home so convincingly to men's hearts as here. And by way of a final emphasis on these transcendent truths, the Oriental prophet repeats his supreme argument, "For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water." To the Oriental reader, no claim for divine power could seem to outreach this. As we have seen, the sandy desert is to him the one eternal and unchanging fact, and to say that it shall be plenteously filled with water is to include all promises. We need to remember that, in that eastern land, water is considered the most precious of all substances. Comparatively small quantities are often transported miles upon the backs of camels and mules, and in remote desert places a cup of water is literally worth its weight in gold, far more perhaps, for it may mean the difference between life and death. We in the West, who seldom know a real shortage of water, whose climate is, if anything, a trifle too wet for comfort, have to use our imagination again in order that we may realize how powerful and telling this simile really is, and all that it conveys of the power, and majesty, and resources, and love of God. In the habitation of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes. As the result of prayer, of the recollection of the omnipresence of God, and the affirmation of faith in His goodness, we are to lose our fear, regain our power of manifesting harmony and peace, obtain our physical healing, no matter what the malady may have been, and, above all, we are to develop spiritual perception, spiritual understanding, the power of speaking the word with effect, and to acquire the capacity to develop new spiritual faculties altogether, for which there are no words in ordinary language. We are but lame men without these faculties. And now the prophet says significantly, in the habitation of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes. This is a very remarkable and significant statement. The writer of this wonderful treatment knew all there is to be known about human nature. Our psychological experts are just beginning to scratch the surface of this subject. Nevertheless, much good work has been done by what is called the New Psychology, in spite of its manifest errors, and people are just beginning to realize the existence of those dark, unfathomed caves of our nature that are nowadays called the subconscious mind. We are beginning to realize that a thought is not dead or powerless merely because we are not consciously thinking it, but that it has simply floated out of sight under the ice, as it were, carrying with it all the potentialities that it had for evil, and much more in addition, now that it is out of sight. We are beginning to understand that a thing is not destroyed because it is suppressed, but, on the contrary, just as compression increases tremendously the detonating power of an explosive, so thoughts and feelings, and especially feelings that for one reason or another we do not care to face frankly, acquire an incalculable access of power for evil when they are suppressed into the subconscious and become what we call complexes. Indeed, psychotherapeutics has proved that a very large share of all our temporal ills spring from these very things. Now, Isaiah knew all this, and his name for these complexes is dragons, and a very good name too. It would be difficult to find a better one. And here he promises that as a result of prayer the dragons shall be cleared out and destroyed, and the watery depths where each lay shall become a secure and peaceful mead, quiet with grass and reeds and rushes. And an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. We now come to one of the transcendent revelations of the Bible. For sheer power and splendor this passage stands alone. The whole stanza is quite unmatched either in Scripture or elsewhere. The prophet rises higher and higher on the inspirational tide that bears him onward as he envisions the complete salvation of mankind that shall be. His eye sweeps along the whole flood of spiritual evolution right on to the uttermost bounds where the human and the divine shall be merged in final unity. For the individual, too, it is the promise and the means for the triumphant journey back to God. It is the great manifesto of salvation, the complete statement of the way of escape from limitation, sin, sickness, and death. And an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. This is a definite and one may say, business-like statement that there is to be a way out. It means that it is no longer to be necessary for man to put up with anything less than perfect harmony. It really means that resignation to anything less than peace, health, and harmony, so far from being a virtue, will be known as what it actually is, a breach of the law of being. Let us make no mistake about this. Now that this way has been opened, resignation to limitation and inharmony is nothing but a fine name for laziness and cowardice. The prophet definitely says that there shall be a highway. Now what is a highway? Is it not a public main road, accessible to everybody, which all those who observe the law use with equal right? No one has any authority to put a barrier on the highway, to fence it off to the exclusion of certain people, or to exercise any kind of proprietary rights whatever. That is what a highway is, and the prophet here definitely says that the path of freedom and salvation is to be a highway. No man, no organization, no rules and regulations of either the dead or the living, have any power or authority whatever to forbid anyone to that highway, or to make any terms upon which he shall enter it. No conditions of membership, no entrance fees or entrance ceremonials have any authority from the inspired word. It is public. It is open. It is free. Having prophesied a highway, the writer then definitely states that it will be a way. Now a way, of course, is a technical term meaning a way back to the consciousness of the real presence of God. It is what we often call the path. And we may pause for a moment here to realize the tremendous importance of the statement that the path is a highway. Most religious movements, at any rate the older and greater ones, have taught of the path and how to enter upon it. But always they treated it, not as a highway, but as a private road fenced in by themselves, to the gates of which they alone held the keys. The Bible, however, came to the world to break down this exclusiveness and to say that the way is a highway. It is really impossible for the student to overstress the importance of this fact. Again and again and again throughout history, the open highway has been given to the people for a short time, only to be closed up again, and before very long, and usually by the very people who had opened it. So grave are the dangers that attend organized religion, so powerful and so subtle are the evils resulting from the accumulation of much property, an evil which overtakes almost every well-organized church sooner or later, that unless we keep this point constantly fresh in our minds, we may be in danger of repeating the old mistakes. The prophet goes on to say that the way or the path is the path of holiness. Now, of course, we need to understand that the Bible uses the word holiness in a very much wider and more far-reaching sense than the usual one. The word holiness really means wholeness, not just holiness of character, rare and wonderful as that is, but complete holiness of life. This includes perfect bodily health. No invalid is holy in the Bible sense, however spiritual he or she may be in other respects. It includes the idea of happiness or true peace of mind, of prosperity, which means freedom from nagging fears concerning the necessaries of life. In fact, holiness means all-round health, prosperity, and spiritual harmony. Actually, the words whole, holy, wholesome, heal, and healing all go back to the same Old English root, because they are but different aspects of the same thing. This does not in the least detract from the transcendent importance of what is usually designated holiness, the thing to which a great modern rationalist referred sadly when he said, "Holiness, deepest of all words that defy definition." The prophet goes on to say of this glorious highway, "The unclean shall not pass over it." Now exactly what does this mean? Too often it has been supposed to imply that the ordinary human being, full of faults and shortcomings, and, still more, one conscious of graver sin, has no chance upon that highway, that it is reserved for the saint and the spiritual hero, for those who are indeed clean. Yet nothing could possibly be farther from the truth. What point could there be in providing a highway for those who are already saved? Did not our Lord say, "The well need not a physician, but those who are sick"? And indeed to suppose otherwise would be like saying that one should not use soap until his hands were clean. The fact is, you do not bring a clean heart to God that He may love you for it, you bring your unclean heart to Him in order that He may cleanse it. The real meaning of this magnificent statement, the real bearing of this whole glorious final stanza, is that the highway shall be provided for the average human being, the wayfaring man, you and me who stand in need of purification and salvation. The unclean are those very thoughts and beliefs of limitation, sin, sickness, fear, doubt, and so forth, that are the only things keeping us out of the kingdom of heaven today. These are the unclean, and once we are upon that highway they have no more power to hinder our progress, their power of keeping us back in the darkness is gone. No longer need frail, weak human beings fear to approach the highway. It shall be for those. The wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. Having shown that no degree of weakness or guilt can keep a man off the path, if he really wants to enter upon it. Isaiah here takes up the other point that no lack of intellectual power or intellectual training can exclude him either. No want of what is called cleverness, or what is generally called education, makes any difference here. The most brilliant academic career, and the simplest unlettered background, are equally unimportant, provided there is the right intention, reinforced by right application. As a matter of fact, intellectual brilliance and much secular knowledge have kept many people off of this path because, under our modern system of education, these things are very apt to beget spiritual pride. On the other hand, a good sound intelligence, while not in the least a guarantee of spiritual power, is likely to be very helpful in spiritual development because it enables the candidate to appreciate the need for thoroughness, faithfulness, and disinterestedness, and it leads them to check up their results in order to ensure that they really are making progress as time goes on. It saves them from living in a fool's paradise by supposing that they are demonstrating when they are not. It enables them to distinguish between spiritual progress and mere emotional indulgence. The great point is that we do not have to bring knowledge or wisdom to the path, but that it is the function of the path to equip us with these things. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon, it shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. Here the whole story is repeated in another form, in accordance with the Eastern poetical tradition, which drives home its points by means of variety of iteration. Once upon the path, troubles and difficulties will indeed still come to us, for a time at least, but now they come up from the inside, so to say, they emerge from the depths of our own personality, because they have no business to be there, and are to be dealt with once and for all. No longer are they lions or ravenous beasts from which we need to be protected, but rather are they problems to be solved once and for all, that we may be free forever. And now this wonderful poem finishes up with one of the supreme verses of the whole Bible. Having entered and walked the path, learned the lessons, and won the crown of completed understanding, our limitations and our spectral fears, for specters they are, that and nothing more, disappear forever, and the glory of the union, the grand transformation, is completed. Old things are passed away and the ransomed of the Lord return, and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Did ever man write like this? The ransomed of the Lord are of course those who have realized, not merely believed, but realized their oneness with their own indwelling Christ, realized that that indwelling Christ is in reality and truth themselves, not near to, not belonging to, but identical with themselves. Such are they who really have demonstrated the I Am. And they shall return and come to Zion. Zion is the direct realization of God. Jerusalem is the highest thing in the human consciousness less than the divine contact, but Zion is the realization of God Himself. It is to this that the souls triumphant will come, and, says the poet, with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They are to come singing, he says, and this is significant, for a spontaneous song is our natural expression of the highest joy. The instinct of the human soul, which has not been cramped by taboos and inhibitions, is to burst into song when it feels happy and free, and so the Bible rightly uses the idea of singing to express utter and spontaneous joy. And note that it says, everlasting joy, not joy that may fade away with the lapse of time or the coming of some unexpected cloud. This joy is to be the joy of God, that never can and never will wane when once we have found it. So precise and thorough is the Bible's expounding of the way of man's salvation that here it makes a point of putting the joy upon their heads. Now the human head symbolizes always the Christ understanding of truth, as distinct from mere blind faith, or simple emotional groping, and so here we see that this divine joy is to be the joy of perfect understanding, which is the only real guarantee of permanence. Our poem terminates its glorious upward sweep with a final clinching assurance, much as one might comfort a doubting child, an assurance that all this is really true, saying in the simplest language, sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they repose in thee. Signed, Augustine. Chapter 5, The Golden Key. Foreword. I have compressed this essay into a few pages. Had it been possible, I would have reduced it to as many lines. It is not intended to be an instructional treatise, but a practical recipe for getting out of trouble. Study and research are well in their own time and place, but no amount of either will get you out of a concrete difficulty. Nothing but practical work in your own consciousness will do that. The mistake made by many people, when things go wrong, is to skim through book after book, without getting anywhere. Read the Golden Key several times. Do exactly what it says, and if you are persistent enough you will overcome any difficulty. Scientific prayer will enable you, sooner or later, to get yourself, or anyone else, out of any difficulty on the face of the earth. It is the golden key to harmony and happiness. To those who have no acquaintance with the mightiest power in existence, this may appear to be a rash claim, but it needs only a fair trial to prove that, without a shadow of doubt, it is a just one. You need take no one's word for it, and you should not. Simply try it for yourself, and see. God is omnipotent, and man is his image and likeness, and has dominion over all things. This is the inspired teaching, and it is intended to be taken literally, at its face value. Man means every man and woman, and so the ability to draw on this power is not the special prerogative of the mystic or the saint, as is so often supposed, or even of the highly trained practitioner. Whoever you are, wherever you may be, the golden key to harmony is in your hand now. This is because in scientific prayer it is God who works, and not you, and so your particular limitations or weaknesses are of no account in the process. You are only the channel through which the divine action takes place, and your treatment will really be just the getting of yourself out of the way. Beginners often get startling results at the first time of trying, for all that is absolutely essential is to have an open mind, and sufficient faith to try the experiment. Apart from that, you may hold any views on religion, or none. As for the actual method of working, like all fundamental things, it is simplicity itself. All that you have to do is this: stop thinking about the difficulty, whatever it is, and think about God instead. This is the complete rule, and if only you will do this, the trouble, whatever it is, will presently disappear. It makes no difference what kind of trouble it is. It may be a big thing or a little thing. It may concern health, finance, a lawsuit, a quarrel, an accident, or anything else conceivable, but whatever it is, just stop thinking about it, and think of God instead. That is all you have to do. The thing could not be simpler, could it? God himself could scarcely have made it simpler, and yet it never fails to work when given a fair trial. Do not try to form a picture of God, which is, of course, impossible. Work by rehearsing anything or everything that you know about God. God is wisdom, truth, inconceivable love. God is present everywhere, has infinite power, knows everything, and so on. It matters not how well you may think you understand these things, go over them repeatedly. But you must stop thinking of the trouble, whatever it is. The rule is to think about God, and if you are thinking about your difficulty you are not thinking about God. To be continually glancing over your shoulder, as it were, in order to see how matters are progressing, is fatal, because that is thinking of the trouble, and you must think of God, and of nothing else. Your object is to drive the thought of the difficulty right out of your consciousness, for a few moments at least, substituting for it the thought of God. This is the crux of the whole thing. If you can become so absorbed in this consideration of the spiritual world that you really forget for a while all about the trouble concerning which you began to pray, you will presently find that you are safely and comfortably out of your difficulty, that your demonstration is made. In order to, golden key, a troublesome person or a difficult situation, think, now I am going to, golden key, John, or Mary, or that threatened danger, then proceed to drive all thought of John, or Mary, or the danger right out of your mind, replacing it by the thought of God. By working in this way about a person, you are not seeking to influence his or her conduct in any way, except that you prevent them from injuring or annoying you, and you do them nothing but good. Thereafter they are certain to be in some degree a better, wiser, and more spiritual person, just because you have golden keyed them. A pending lawsuit or other difficulty would probably fade out harmlessly without coming to a crisis, justice being done to all parties concerned. If you find that you can do this very quickly, you may repeat the operation several times a day with intervals between. Be sure, however, each time you have done it, that you drop all thought of the matter until the next time. This is important. We have said that the golden key is simple, and so it is, but, of course, it is not always easy to turn. If you are very frightened or worried, it may be difficult, at first, to get your thoughts away from material things. But by constantly repeating some statement of absolute truth that appeals to you, such as there is no power but God, or I am the child of God, filled and surrounded by the perfect peace of God, or God is love, or God is guiding me now, or, perhaps best and simplest of all, just God is with me, however mechanical or dead it may seem at first, you will soon find that the treatment has begun to take, and that your mind is clearing. Do not struggle violently, be quiet but insistent. Each time that you find your attention wandering, just switch it straight back to God. Do not try to think out in advance what the solution of your difficulty will probably turn out to be. This is technically called outlining, and will only delay the demonstration. Leave the question of ways and means strictly to God. You want to get out of your difficulty? That is sufficient. You do your half, and God will never fail to do his. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. The end. You have heard Power Through Constructive Thinking, Volume 2 by Emmett Fox, a creation of Rich and Spiritual.